Hello and welcome. You're watching COVID-19 for this Wednesday, September 29th. An important political process is underway over in neighboring Japan amid the pandemic. With more on the Japanese ruling party's vote for a new leader later on in the program after a look at the global pandemic updates with our Kwon So-ah. Now, So-ah, welcome.
Hi, Sunny.
Right, let's start then with Korea's COVID-19 tallies for this Wednesday.
All right, Korea has reported its second highest ever number of daily infections this Wednesday, and the number stands at 2,885 as of 12 a.m. And that is an increase in both domestic and imported cases. Now, it's also almost 600 more cases compared to Tuesday, as you can see this jump here. And with that, the average number of daily infections in the past week stands at around 2,500. Also, this number represents quite a jump from last Wednesday, an on-week jump by 1,165 infections. But this relatively lower caseload last Wednesday was attributed to the Chuseok holidays. However, this number is the highest ever we are seeing on a Wednesday. And for a closer look at our map, the capital Seoul has reported over 1,000 infections and also close to 1,000 in Gyeonggi-do province, also triple digits in Incheon as well as here in Daegu. Now, in total, Korea now has 308,725 infections with a death toll at 2,474, with 10 people having lost their lives in the past day due to this virus. Meanwhile, onto the vaccination figures, 75.5% of the nation's population has received at least one shot of COVID-19 vaccine, with 48% having been fully vaccinated. Let's move over to global updates. 233.5 million people in total have been infected with coronavirus, with 4.7 million deaths in total. And meanwhile, the U.S. has now hit 44 million cases in total. Let's also take a look at some countries that our G. Abby Lee is going to take a closer look in our next segment later. Russia and France here with 7.4 million and 7 million cases respectively. France has just hit the 7 million mark with an increase of some thousands of new cases. In fact, 6,700 new infections reported in the past 24 hours as of noon Korea time. And those are the general updates I have for now, but I'll see you back in a bit. Sunny?
All right, so thank you for now. Right, disputes over noise in residential areas have led to violent confrontations here on the local front, especially amid the pandemic, as people opt to stay at home to keep safe. Now, Kim Sung-yeon joins me now in the studio with details on that. Sung-yeon, welcome.
Good to see you.
Now, first then, there are posters at my residential place calling for against, that is, playing the piano or turning on your vacuum cleaner after 10 in the evening. So I can fully relate to this.
Well, same goes here, Sunny. The issue has certainly been exacerbated with COVID-19 as people have been spending most of their time at home. It has led to more violence, thus, and even murders. And just on Monday, in fact, an apartment resident in the city of Yeosu in Jeollanam-do province was arrested for killing his neighbors over a noise dispute.
I think he had trouble sleeping because of the noise coming from the other floor, and it led to the triggering of charged emotions.
In a country where around 2/3 of the population live in high-rise apartment blocks, quote-unquote noise between floors has been a recurring source of friction between residents here in the country. Aside from noise, smoking has also led to conflict between neighbors, especially with more people lighting up a cigarette at home due to restrictions on outdoor activities. The smoke is often carried upwards, entering other homes on higher floors through their windows.
Right, and might I add, for non-smokers, the smell is complete torture. Sung-yeon. Now, here, cases of such disputes have been surging.
That's correct. In fact, according to a recent survey, Sunny, there has been a sharp rise in the number of noise complaints filed compared to previous years. Now, last year, more than 42,000 complaints were lodged to a noise pollution hotline run by the Korea Environment Corporation. Compared to around 26,000 complaints in 2019, the number of complaints jumped by more than 60% in a single year. The Korea Environment Corporation also said it consulted more than 200,000 people by phone and online from 2012 to 2020 regarding noise issues. Meanwhile, more than 2,800 complaints related to cigarette odors were filed last year, according to Korea's Anti-Corruption and Civil Rights Commission, which is a near 20% jump from a year earlier.
Right. So, Songyeon, is there a solution to this?
Well, there are a number of measures set aside by authorities, Sunny, and the government is also running a national center dedicated to handling noise disputes. Now, the center is run by the Ministry of Environment and offers mediation to resolve issues before they head to court and to patch up relations between neighbors caught in a dispute. Also, the Korean government is working closely with construction firms for new building designs and the use of different materials to reduce noise between floors. Now, in June, the National Assembly passed a revised construction law that will require new residential buildings that can accommodate more than 30 households to undergo noise level testing from July of 2022. In the meantime, the problem regarding cigarette odors can be more difficult to deal with, as according to current legislation, residents who smoke within their homes can only be advised not to do that as there is no ban in place.
Right, I see. So in the meantime, I suppose knowing your neighbors then would perhaps help you to better share your discomforts with them.
Well, I mean, it's easier said than done, Sunny. But experts do say that you should communicate directly with your neighbors when you can, and that you should work to resolve a dispute within 6 months of the issue arising. Researchers, they say if the dispute lingers for more than 6 months, dragging on for a year or more, that is when emotions start to get involved that could impair your ability to think rationally.
Usually, crimes like murder by a neighbor due to noise disputes usually happen after around a year has passed since the start of the conflict.
If direct negotiation fails, though, experts advise residents to seek the help of authorities rather than get into a potentially dangerous confrontation with your neighbors. They added that although these disputes are difficult to resolve, it's important to keep a cool head and be as considerate as possible to your neighbors to avoid any hostile and even violent encounters.
Right, Songyeon, then as always, thank you very much for that report.
Thank you for having me.
Right, up next, we have more on pandemic-related efforts by authorities here. And for that, Soa is back at the desk. Right, Soa?
Hi again, Sunny.
Right, then let's begin with findings that reportedly highlight the merit of rising public vaccination rate here in the country.
Right, Sunny. Son Young-ne, an official at the Health Ministry this Wednesday, provided data showing a significant decline in deaths and serious illnesses, comparing figures of Korea's COVID-19 situation during the third wave and during the current fourth wave. So let's take a closer listen.
3차 유행 시기인 작년 12월의 경우
The COVID-19 fatality rate in December last year during the third wave of the virus was at 2.7%, with 716 people having lost their lives in a month. While this year in August, fatality rate stood at 0.35% with 184 deaths. Despite a higher number of infections, the proportion of people in critical or severe conditions stood at 4.72% in August last year, while this year in August it stood at 2.17%.
The official noted that unvaccinated people account for the majority of recent COVID-19 deaths and critical cases, as 90% of infections in recent months among people aged 18 and above were reported among people who were not fully vaccinated. Among 2,292 patients in severe or critical condition, 95.6% were people who have not been fully vaccinated. Also, out of 280 people that died in that period, 87.5% were not fully vaccinated. Now, authorities are calling for more cooperation, especially among those who haven't signed up yet to get a vaccine. Late bookings for regular citizens aged 18 and above and on Thursday 6 p.m., but just some 5.3% of eligible people have made their reservations. And Sunny, again, we're talking about those people who have not made their reservations before, although the government had given schedules before that.
Right. So, meanwhile, what's the latest with regard to possible adoption of vaccine passes here in the country?
Well, Sunny, reporters have asked that question regarding vaccine passes after the health minister Kwon Dok-cheol yesterday mentioned that similar passes like those used in Germany may be introduced here in Korea as well. And those vaccine passes will give more freedom to fully vaccinated people. Now, what Son Young-ne, the official earlier mentioned today, is that if such passes are introduced here in the country, there might be some restrictions to people at at certain venues such as multi-use facilities or even some events if they're either not vaccinated, so don't have these vaccine passes, or if they cannot submit PCR test results that show that they tested negative. But he also said that the government has to consider those people who in the first place could not get vaccinated, for instance, kids.
Right. Also, we spoke about this yesterday, but I hear more has been shared about the rising rate of transmissions among foreign workers here in the country.
Right, Sunny. So the government has been making more discussions on how to lower the number of infections among foreigners, and also while getting more people tested and vaccinated. And the government announced this decision at the earlier briefing.
As the KDCA said yesterday, foreigners made up 16.2% of infections last week, with their infection rate being 9 times higher than that of Korean citizens, when comparing the number of cases per 100,000 people. The Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport has decided to allow foreign laborers to work on railways, roads, and construction sites only if they've been tested for the virus by September 30th and received negative results.
And also more education on prevention guidelines is to be enacted at such places, and employers will be asked to help encourage these foreign workers to get tested and also vaccinated.
Right. So as always, then, thank you for those updates.
My pleasure.
Right, turning now to the international front, Russia has seen a record number of COVID-19 fatalities in recent days. And for more on this grim reality, Ji Lee joins me now. Ji, tell us more.
Hi, Sunny. So Russia has reported more than 850 new deaths from COVID-19 in the past 24 hours, breaking the previous record high from the week prior. In terms of the infection rate, authorities reported 22,000 new cases in the past 24 hours, slightly down from more than 22,000 on Monday. At the start of this week, Russia ranked first in the number of COVID-19 related deaths in the world for 2 days in a row. Daily cases started climbing in early September after students started attending schools and universities in person. Authorities in Moscow said they were tightening controls over mandatory mask wearing amid fears of a fourth wave of COVID-19. Public opinion in Russia is split on these stricter measures.
I believe the novel coronavirus restrictions have been excessive from the beginning. We can see very well that the virus is a disease that is here to stay. So we need to work on the pharmaceutical side to solve the problem without such strict repressive measures.
I think we need measures like restriction on the number of out-of-town visitors and also of those who travel abroad. And fewer people should go out to cafes and restaurants because I believe one can be exposed in such places.
Sunny, a whopping 40 million Russians have been fully inoculated, but with a population of 146 million, the vaccination rate stands at less than 30%.
I see. Well, let's hope the inoculation rate there picks up pace in the near future. Meanwhile, Ji, speaking of inoculation, I hear the global trade body had something to say with regard to vaccines.
That's right. So for that, let's hear from the World Trade Organization. The head of the WTO was speaking at the opening session of a Geneva-based trade event alongside South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa.
While nearly 60% of people in developed countries are fully vaccinated, in Africa, the figure is barely 4%. This is devastating for the lives and livelihoods of Africans.
She added the organization must help address vaccine inequity. Ramaphosa, for his part, said a waiver on patents was needed to save lives during the pandemic. The South African president explained this is not the time to be thinking about profits. The WTO began discussions on a waiver to intellectual property rules for COVID-19 vaccines and treatments about a year ago, but several countries with robust pharmaceutical industries, such as Switzerland, have been opposing the plan. Speaking at the event, the World Health Organization chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus also said he expected all countries, including China, to collaborate in the second phase of a probe into the origins of the coronavirus.
Right, Jane. Now, I see our final story today also takes us to Europe.
That's right. So for that, let's go over to France, where its citizens are feeling a sense of normalcy restored in their lives. As I mentioned yesterday, 66% of the citizens are fully vaccinated. And with that, France's tradition of la bise is slowly making a comeback. At the height of the pandemic, the kiss on the cheeks had been de facto banned in the spirit of social distancing. But with the country's high vaccination rate, French citizens are now less worried about the human-to-human contact. Even President Emmanuel Macron, who had recommended people not to kiss or shake hands to help reduce contagion risks, are now occasionally seen vers la bise. But Paris-based British comedian Paul Taylor is a bit critical of the change. His YouTube video, a sketch on the la bise, went viral.
I think it's even more awkward now because with the masks, like people that you know, like I've seen people wearing masks and they take them off to do la bise and they put the masks back on. It's like, well, what are we doing here? Like, what's the point? And then now it's even more awkward because you've got the elbows that are in there, you've got the fists, so no one knows. There's been extra stuff added to the awkwardness of saying hello since the whole pandemic.
Well, that's all for me today. I'll give you a socially distanced goodbye from across the partition.
Right. Thank you, Jill. See you again tomorrow. Right, back on the local front, there is a robot here that offers the elderly lessons on digital technology as part of efforts to bridge the gap between those actively engaged in the advances and those struggling to adopt them. Do take a look.
Ever since the outbreak of COVID-19, we're living in a non-contact era. So ordering a burger at the kiosk or using smartphone when you're shopping, these things are no longer strange to us. With the preference for non-contact method due to COVID-19, digital commercialization is on the rapid growth. This trend, however, has led to a wider digital gap with an increase in so-called digital illiteracy among the elderly people. This digital gap is apparent when comparing the smartphone ownership rate. In fact, as of last year, 92.3% of the general public owned mobile smart devices, while only 44.9% of those in their 70s had one. From banking to food delivery services, so many things can be done via smartphones. But it's not easy for the elderly who are not familiar with these devices. Digital education is also being conducted here so that the elderly can use smart devices well. So now let's have a talk with a student in this classroom. 어머니 안녕하세요.
안녕하세요.
네, 혹시 이 수업에 참여하게 된 계기가 있으실까요?
예, 코로나 때문에 집에서 막막하게 있는데 복지관에서 연락이 왔어요. 인터넷 뱅킹이랄지 그 주문, 물건 이런 걸 하나도 몰랐는데 여기에서 선생님들이 이렇게 가르쳐 주셔가지고 잘 배워서 잘 쓰고 있어요. 그래서 너무 감사해요. 만나서 반가워.
고마워요.
날씨.
가을은 딱 적당히 시원해서 좋아요.
The most special thing about this class is a robot called Riku that helps the education and learning process. Robot Riku, equipped with artificial intelligence, not only looks into the eyes of the elderly and holds conversation with them, but also teaches basic smartphone tasks such as various functions of mobile messengers.
얘가 지금 이야기하는 대로 한번 따라해 보세요.
채팅 목록은 메시지가 온 시간에 따라 순서가 계속 바뀌는데
이제 난생 처음으로 이렇게 로봇하고 이렇게 대화를 해보니까 진짜 신통각동 하더라고요. 신기하게. 이렇게 세상이 늘 변하고 발달적으로 나가니까 이런 로봇 시대가 오는 것도 괜찮겠더라고요.
Even kiosk classes are conducted here, one of the most difficult tasks for seniors. Participants can practice how to use them at fast food restaurants, movie theaters, and cafes in advance.
키오스크라든가 이런 것들을 간단하게 가르쳐드리고 또는 이제 QR 코드 이런 것들을 가르쳐드리고 나면 그 다음 수업에 들어오셔서 내가 우리 젊은이들 줄 서 있는데 그거 당당하게 하고 왔어 이렇게 자랑도 하시고 또 이야기하시는 분들이 되게 많습니다.
서울 디지털 재단은 이런 디지털 격차 해소, 이런 포용, 또 앞으로 이제 시민들이 행복하게 할 수 있는 그 스마트 시티를 만드는 데 기여를 할 것입니다.
experts stress the importance of each member of our society in narrowing the digital gap.
정보 서비스라는 것은 대한민국 사회에서 생활하는 모든 시민이 다 누려야 될 일종의 권리라고 할 수 있는데 그 시민으로서 이 권리를 누릴 수 있도록 해주는 게 중요하다고 봅니다. 첫 번째로는 그 이용을 좀 더 쉽게 하는 방법이 가장 중요할 거고요. 두 번째로는 교육을 그 미디어 교육을 계속 하는 것도 도움이 되겠죠.
We're living in a rapidly changing digital society that makes it all the more important to provide technical and social consideration for the marginalized elderly. So this has been Jessica Lee.
국민の皆さんの命と暮らしを守る内閣総理大臣として私の責務でありますので、専任をしてここをやり遂げたい、このように思います。
国民の声を聞き、そして丁寧で謙虚な政治、多様な意見に寛容な政治が求められているのではないでしょうか。
できるかもしれない。そう思ってみんなが少しずつ手を伸ばしたら、いつかは星に手が届くかもしれない。みんながそう思ってくれる日本の国を作りたい。
Lawmaker voting for the leader of Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party began at 1 p.m. on this Wednesday here in this part of the world. The first round tally has been announced, with Fumio Kishida leading by one vote with 256 votes over Taro Kono with 255 votes. Therefore, a runoff voting is currently underway, with the results of that expected before 4 p.m. today. In the meantime, for more on the political process there and its implications on the Seoul Tokyo ties, I have Professor Min Jung-hoon from the National Diplomatic Academy here in Korea. It's been a while, Professor Min.
My pleasure to be here.
I also have Professor Im Eun-jung at Koongju National University joining us virtually. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Professor Im.
Thank you for having me.
And Professor Kiyoshi Abe at Kwansei Gakuin University over in Japan is with us as well. Welcome, Professor Abe.
Thank you very much for having me.
Right, we'll start here in the studio then. Professor Min, the leader of the ruling party is most likely to become the next Japanese Prime Minister. Let's first begin with a few words then on the election system over in Japan.
Well, let me briefly explain how the election systems in two countries, South Korea and Japan, could be different in terms of the deciding the winner of the election. Basically, the two countries have a little bit different political systems. Like you mentioned, the South Korea has got a kind of presidential system, but Japan has a parliamentary system, and Japan also has the emperor, like a king in the royal family. And in South Korea, a president is the head of a state, and the president is also the head of government. Meanwhile, in Japan, the emperor is the head of a state, and the prime minister is the head of government. And in Japan, a leader of the ruling party becomes the prime minister of the country. And the current ruling party of Japan is the Liberal Democratic Party, LDP, as a result of the 2017 general election. And in order to elect each party leader, LDP lawmakers and each rank and file party members and supporters cast their ballots. And it is like an intra-party election within one party election, and newly elected party leader becomes the prime minister of the country. And as you mentioned, currently voting to elect a new leader of LDP is on the way, and the winner of the party leadership election will be automatically the next Prime Minister of Japan.
Right. Having said that then, Professor Im, what now are your thoughts on the results of the first round, which I mentioned at the start of this segment, which has Fumio Kishida leading with one vote at 256?
Well, it was a little different from, I think, expectation of many, including myself, because we all knew that Kono has been much more popular than the other candidates, more specifically speaking, Mr. Kishida. But again, as Professor Minoledi explained, their voting system rules are different from South Korea's system. Here again, in this country, in South Korea, again, the popular vote can decide on the winners, whereas, there it's more like an indirect. Again, the party members and legislators who has the LDP membership, they voted on the winners. So their voting system does not necessarily reflect the whole society's, I think, the opinion. Again, it's an intra-party voting, and plus, if you think about who voted, who decided on the winners, again, that does not necessarily really same with the majority of the Japanese society. So, well, Kono has been popular, but again, he lost the first one, so probably it looks like Kishida is very likely to win the second one too. Mm-hmm.
Right, because as Professor Min mentioned, then the people of Japan pick parties and not the politicians. Professor Abe, given your observations from the home ground, which candidate appears most likely to win the leadership race?
Yeah, I think as Professor Lim says, Kono is expected to get the first position at the first round of race, but actually the Kishida gets the first point. So it means Kishida is now very advantageous position, because then in the final round, it is said that a supporter of Takaichi will cooperate with a supporter with Kishida. So I also think Kishida will be the next leader of LDP.
Having said that, Professor Abe, what more can you tell us about Fumio Kishida, who served, that is, as the former foreign minister, and is also a leader of his own faction of 46 members, I believe?
Yeah, I think that Kishida has been a hopeful candidate for the next prime minister for a long time. But in comparison to the other rivals, and he's not so popular among the public in general, because he's a rather decent character and very seems to be very ordinary. So some people think he's not so politically attractive enough for making a change or some kind of the breakthrough.
I see. Meanwhile, Professor Im, do you believe the candidates' respective stances now on COVID-19 strategies affected their chances perhaps of winning, or will affect their chances of winning this leadership race?
Again, if it was supposed to be decided by the popular vote, just like Korean system, if so, the COVID issue must have been the determining variable. But again, in the Japanese system, again, the party members and the legislator have the LDP membership, they vote, which means, of course, COVID situation, that's really the urgent issue, not only for Japan, for any probably country, but that might not be really the determining thing, because the reason why I say like this way is, the legislator, they're going to think about the coherence of their party leadership. or like how can LDP sustain their power even during or even after the upcoming general election, right? So those kind of more like very different dynamics might have been considered by the LDP legislators. Again, that is why I earlier said that does not necessarily be overlapped with the majority's opinions. Mm-hmm.
Right. Professor Abe, I understand, though, that Japan's COVID-19 strategy also brought to light its shortcomings, prompting widespread public calls for comprehensive reforms, so to speak. What more can you tell us about this?
Yeah, so according to the poll conducted by NHK this month, 44% of the public expect that the issue of COVID-19 should be mainly discussed in the race of the leadership election. So that it also reflects that over half of the population show their negative assessment to the COVID-19 policy implemented by the present government. So since the beginning of the pandemic, we have seen severe reality. It's just showing that the Japanese political system is neither well organized nor effective enough to guarantee the safety and life of the nation. Therefore, it seems that the majority of the public now hopes that the politician and also the new leader of LDP should make the basic condition of the ordinary people more secure and certain enough that they can enjoy their everyday life.
Right, which is the hopes of people across the globe amid the pandemic, of course. Professor Min, on the international front then, the new leader of the ruling party will need to engage in active collaboration with its foreign partners to weather the pandemic and more. Now, having said that, what are your thoughts on Japan's current diplomatic standing?
Well, basically, I think that Japan's diplomacy and security are mainly based on two things. The first, strengthening US-Japan alliance, and secondly, maintaining and strengthening, extending Japan's influence over Asia through the Indo-Pacific vision or strategy. First, as you know, Japan's alliance with the US has been most important to secure its security in the region, and Japan is eager to working with the US to cope with North Korean security threats and to check the rise of China. And Japan is a key partner of the US in terms of maintaining American leadership in East Asia. In addition, Japan plays active roles in implementing the Indo-Pacific strategy. And it is well known that Japan promoted the strategy, and finally, Trump administration adopted it as a new Asia-Pacific strategy of the United States. So with the strategy, Japan is trying to check the rise of China and also trying to extend its the influence over Southeast Asia, including ASEAN countries. Specifically, as the Quad member, the Japan is closely working together with the U.S. to check the rise of China in various aspects, like vaccine diplomacy, technology, and the supply chains and international standards. And Japan and U.S. are also encouraging the regional countries like ASEAN countries to join the Indo-Pacific regional strategy by providing them with the various projects for economic development and cooperation. So I don't think that the such features will change under new prime minister leadership, because they will continue to consist of the Japan's core national interests.
Right. And Professor Lim, what's your take now on the new leadership's potential stance on Seoul Tokyo ties?
Well, that's the most probably difficult question. I know, as I can agree more with the Professor Min's that observations. Again, the FOIP, free and open Indo-Pacific, that vision or strategy, whatever you call, that was suggested originally by Prime Minister Abe. Right? The main reason why they suggested that kind of vision is again the presence or ontological threat challenge from the China. So having said that, as long as Japan wants to make a good kind of balance vis-a-vis China-centered war, if so, South Korea's position can be very, very difficult because economically speaking, we're very much dependent on Chinese market, but at the same time, South Korea is also a ally of the United States. So having said that, as long as the strategic calculations of South Korea and Japan's are somewhat different or significantly different, if so, Seoul Tokyo ties can be it will be probably difficult to have more like a kind of real rapprochement between the Seoul and Tokyo, which is actually the concern for some people like me, who are studying Japan-Korea relations, or who wants to have more like a constructive relationship between the two countries. Again, the main problem is how can Seoul and Tokyo narrow down the gap in terms of their strategic calculations.
Right. Professor Abe, what appears to be the general view then over in Japan with regard to Seoul-Tokyo ties?
Yeah, so the recent poll of NHK also tells the public interest in the diplomacy and national security is actually not so high. It seems that facing the profound problem in the domestic matters, such as prevailing COVID-19 and worsening domestic economy condition caused by the pandemic, the long-lasting diplomatic problem between Korea and Japan, and also the Japan and other Asian countries, is now somehow suspended in the public opinion. So that, of course, it is far from any sort of resolution on that matter. So that I personally a little bit afraid of that kind of the phenomena seen in the public opinion.
I see. Professor Min, then, what are your prospects with regard to Japan's alliance with the US under a new Japanese leadership, and would that change depending on whether Mr. Kono or Mr. Kishida comes into office?
Well, as I mentioned, Japan's security is mainly based on US, the Japan alliance, and I personally think without the alliance, it would not be easy for Japan to secure its security as it is. So it is expected that the U.S. The Japan alliance will continue to be the stepstone or the cornerstone of the Japan's security. It means that regardless of who will be the next Prime Minister of Japan, Japan is very likely to maintain and strengthen its alliance with the United States. And as you know, U.S. wants to enhance trilateral security cooperation among U.S., South Korea, and Japan, as well as the U.S. Strengthen its bilateral security cooperation with its two key regional allies like South Korea and Japan. So U.S. wants South Korea and Japan to improve their bilateral relationship. But I think it will take some time before South Korea and Japan meet and talk, mainly in terms of the domestic conditions. But anyway, for your question, I think that the U.S. The Japan alliance will be remaining very strong, regardless of who will be the next Prime Minister of the country.
Right. Professor, a website posting on North Korea's foreign ministry this past weekend accused Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga of pursuing a hostile policy following his denunciation, that is, of Pyongyang's recent missile launches at the UN General Assembly. What are your thoughts on their future relationship, that is, between Tokyo and Pyongyang?
Well, I cannot be that optimistic, to be very honest. How would you say? Again, the Japanese mainstream conservative, represented by Prime Minister Abe Shinzo, their goal is, again, they want to maintain a good balance, again, vis-a-vis China. And ultimately, those mainstream conservative, they want to normalize the Japanese state through revising again, the current peace constitution. Having had that kinds of, again, the ultimate goal, threats, any conventional threats from North Korea is actually a kind of good justification for the Japanese conservative to strengthen their strategic capability or to broaden those security networks with like-minded country. Vice versa, probably from North Korea's point of view, I don't need to actually justify or advocate the North Korea's stance, but I also have claimed the same thing. Or again, you guys are threatening us all the time, so this is only for self-defense. So it's a kind of really, we see clear division here, clear polarization here. So that is why I think, again, the South Korea's role is much more than just important. But again, it's hard to expect, hard to have a real kind of good optimism with the other situations.
Right. Meanwhile, Professor Abe, on the domestic front then, what are some of the immediate tasks in your view that need to be addressed by the new Japanese leadership?
Yeah, so as I pointed earlier, that COVID-19 and its hardship revealed how much problem in political system and economic system in Japan has. So the most important thing for new leadership to do is to guarantee and to secure the ordinary people's everyday life. But at the same time, it is not so easy for any party and politician to realize it. Therefore, how to ascertain the basic of life, for example, the income, employment, healthcare, education, through the feasible policy will be the very issue to dispute at the coming general election.
Right. Professor Min, keeping in mind what Professor Abe has just said then, do you suppose the new leadership's strategic response to the pandemic perhaps will determine his political success?
Absolutely. I agree with his opinion by 100%. And basically, I think COVID-19 has been the most important factor to affect the election results and political outcomes in many countries. And this is not the only case for Japan. Think about what happened last year in the United States. Trump administration's coronavirus measures significantly affected the election outcome of the 2020 US president election. And I personally think that if President Trump successfully coped with the virus, it is more likely that he would get reelected last year. And the drop of approval ratings for President Biden have been dropped significantly recently. I think that Biden administration's failure to prevent the virus from spreading out across the country due to the Delta variant significantly affected the decline of his job approval ratings. And as you know, in Japan, Suga decided to step down from party leadership and the premiership after facing criticism over his government's the virus measures and his insistence on holding the Tokyo Olympics despite the public opposition. So I think that COVID-19 continues to play a significant role in deciding election outcomes and political outcomes in the coming months or probably until the next year.
Right, and beyond the pandemic then, Professor Lim, what task is of utmost importance for the new Japanese leader?
Again, as I mentioned earlier, the Japanese government sees this imbalance in this region. They see this problem as really the problem, and together with the complexity of new challenges, like again the public health issue or cybersecurity issue, fourth industrial revolution or climate change. They see all this kind of non-conventional issues as the new challenges or this complicating situations as the challenge. So having had these two problems, again, number one is China's presence as a threat or challenge, and number two is the complexity of newly rising threats. Again, Japan is now really trying to change itself. So the new leadership, I assume, they really want to reform, and they also, I think, they want to have, again, normalize the state. So those two are, I think, the upcoming leadership will be focusing on.
Right, ensuring a sense of normality over in Japan, as Professor Abe has also said. All right, Professor Im, as always, thank you very much for your thoughts. Professor Abe, thank you for being with us today. And Professor Min here in the studio, thank you for your thoughts.
Thank you.
Right, the Moon administration, for its part, has voiced hopes to further advance bilateral ties with the new Japanese leadership. That brings us to the end of this edition. Thank you for watching. See you on Thursday.